When you realize because of inattention, inactivity, just not even being aware of something, you've made a decision. You've made a decision to act, not act, whatever, but it happens without you having to do something. And boy, those make me so infuriated because it feels like there were maybe other ways we could have approached it. So yeah, I try really hard to think about intention. What are we intending to do here? What are we trying to achieve? And that was everything from what am I wearing when I walk in the door the first time as a CEO to am I on Zoom? I'm generally trying to be a thoughtful leader, not make passive decisions.
This is Associations Thrive, the podcast celebrating successful associations and their leaders. I'm your host, Joanna Pineda, CEO and Chief Troublemaker at Matrix Group International. Listen in as top association executives tell all, revealing the creative and innovative ways they're increasing membership, generating revenue, nurturing engagement, and reimagining their organizations. By the way, if you've launched a new initiative, created new member services, or updated your governance structure and are seeing great results, I want to hear your story, and so do my listeners. I'd love to have you as a guest. Go to podcast.matrixgroup.net and apply to be on Associations Thrive. Now let's dive into this week's show. Today, I'm speaking with Kate Fryer, CEO of the Endocrine Society. Kate, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Kate, tell us about the Endocrine Society.
The Endocrine Society is an association of professionals in the field of endocrinology, and that includes the basic research into endocrine science, all the way up to the treatment of patients and physicians in endocrinology. Endocrinology is the study of the system of our bodies that produces hormones and how those hormones travel throughout our body to tell our cells and organs what to do. For many of us, our engagement in this space has been because ourselves or a loved one have a disease or disorder that you would go to an endocrinologist to get treatment for. These days, that is everything from diabetes and other types of insulin disorders and along the gamut of those. We're a 100-plus-year-old society representing about 18,000 members across the world.
Kate, who are your members? Are they physicians and educators? Are they nurses? Who are they?
We describe our membership as bench to bedside. So it is researchers. So these would be PhD folks who are generally at academic institutions who are doing both research and often teaching activities. On the other end of the spectrum, at the bedside, that is physicians in patient-serving communities that are treating patients. In between is a group of folks who are both, who are MD PhDs. So they are both doing research and seeing patients. So it's a pretty wide breadth of potential members. At the moment, they're exclusively physicians, but conversations about expansion are always top of mind.
And Kate, is this field growing?
Oh, that's an interesting question. And I suspect true for many in the science and medicine space. It depends on how you define it. So the questions about who is a member and how do you define is all wrapped up in this, what are the edges of the box? Despite the fact that I'm a Gen Xer, I'm not that big into boxes and labels. And I think it's pretty important that we let our community define that for us. What constitutes endocrine science versus neuroscience or other types of research. It's a gray line. There's not bright lines here. Is it growing as a field? It's growing in a patient population for sure. Some of the biggest challenges facing human health are in this field of endocrinology.
Well, we're going to talk about those in a little bit because, man, the Endocrine Society is involved in a whole lot of stuff. But before we do that, we got to talk about your journey. So how do you get to become CEO of the Endocrine Society? And this is a large organization. You've got, almost 100 staff? And you've got members all over the world.
We do. We've got around 90 staff. We own a space in DC. We've got about a $30 million budget and about 18,000 members. So what got me here? Junior year of college, I realized that what I had gone to undergraduate to do, which was to become a veterinarian, I figured out from a disastrous experience with organic chemistry that I loved the sciences, but was not a scientist myself and was flailing around for what did that mean I should do? And however old I was, 20, I didn't know. So I went to career services and I took one of those tests to see what I should do. And it very helpfully told me I should be one of two things, a forest ranger, and I can't deal with bugs. So that was a hard no.
Uh-oh.
Or being in publishing.
Oh.
And this is something that appealed to me in my soul. I am a reader. I loved this idea. I fell in love with this idea of going to be an acquisitions editor at Random House in New York and discovering the next Margaret Atwood or John Grisham or whomever. And so I got the first degree I could get at that point, changing from science to, I thought, English. What did I need to be in publishing? Ended up with a degree in psychology and then took the very first job I could find. Applied everywhere, and I got a job as a copy editor on the scientific journals of an individual member society, the American Physiological Society.
Ah.
And thus a career was born.
And did you know what an association was?
No.
Yeah.
I didn't have a clue. I mean, if you twisted my arm, could I have maybe said American Bar? Maybe, but no idea. And I hated that job the first day, actually for all 2 years, because copy editing was just not my forte. But I knew it was going to be an important skill. And I loved the environment I was in and what the mission of the organization was, and realized I did a quick go back to for-profit with a publishing company, Wolters Kluwer, and hated it. I realized that showing up and working exclusively for profit, that being the driver, didn't make me want to get up and go to work. And so back to associations I went. I've been there ever since and have no inclination otherwise.
Kate, you became CEO of the Endocrine Society in April 2021. The pandemic is still going. I think Delta was kind of forcing us back all inside. What was that like? This is your first CEO position, and we're in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah, that was a deep breath moment, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was every bit of the roller coaster you could imagine. What I feel like I did right, or at least right for me, was that upon getting the job, I immediately went through CEO update and tried to call every single CEO who had started their job during the pandemic. To say, what did you learn? How did it work? What worked? What didn't? Because while I had never been CEO before, I had run really big divisions at another job, bigger than even the society I run now. So it wasn't the scope and scale that made me anxious, but it also wasn't the work environment. And pre-pandemic, there was kind of only one, and we all did it.
Right.
And then in the pandemic, we hit this work from home that I don't know how to do. I didn't know how to do. I didn't know what it looked like. What does it mean to onboard when you can't talk to anybody? So for me, it was that part. How do I come in and create a connection with the team, with the staff, with the member leaders in a virtual environment? And I needed help understanding how to do that. And so that was where my colleagues, many of whom I didn't know, but very graciously accepted cold calls.
Boy, that's amazing. And so you were at the American Chemical Society at the time, and you took the CEO position. Did you know you wanted to be a CEO, and how did you know you were ready?
Isn't that a great question? At the time that I was interviewing for this job at Endocrine, I knew that I wanted a CEO role, and I thought I was ready. I suffer from the same imposter syndrome that everybody does to this day in the role, and certainly had some then. But the job before American Chemical, that was Society for Neuroscience, where I was for about 17 years, which was where I figured out that I thought I wanted to be a CEO. That was an interesting journey with my mentor, through that period of coming to realize it was time to leave. And that was not simple because, quite frankly, I actually always thought I would stay there and be CEO of that org when he retired. But timing wasn't such that that made sense. And in the end, it worked out, I think, for everybody best. But yeah, it was about coming to recognize in myself the behaviors that told me I was ready. So I mentioned he was my mentor. I took learning very seriously, and he was a gracious teacher, but I would go in all the time to his office and beg him to help me understand why he made X, Y, or Z decision. How did he think about it? And there became a point at which I wasn't having to ask him that question anymore. Why did he do it? I knew why he did it. But it was even one step further than that before I felt like I was ready to start interviewing for CEO roles. And it was when not only did I know why he did it, I now knew why I would do it differently. And for me, that was I've learned what I can, and it's time for me to go get some experiences in other places. And can you imagine a place better than the American Chemical Society, where I had the opportunity to sit alongside some really big thinkers in business and in the society?
Well, let's turn to the Endocrine Society, because I'm hearing this thread of intention, intentional learning, intentional questioning. I mean, your personal journey of being intentional with how you were learning about decision-making, for example, and then deciding that you were ready to chart your own path. That's very, very interesting. But let's talk about the Endocrine Society. And during the prep, you said, I want to always lead with intention. And I loved it when you said, I hate to accidentally make decisions. Oh my God, what a quotable line. So what does that mean to you?
Oh, it's the thing that makes my teeth rub against each other, right? Like when you realize because of inattention, inactivity, just not even being aware of something, you've made a decision. You've made a decision to act, not act, whatever, but it happens without you having to do something. And boy, those make me so infuriated because it feels like there were maybe other ways we could have approached it. So yeah, I tried really hard to think about intention. What are we intending to do here? What are we trying to achieve? And that was everything from what am I wearing when I walk in the door the first time as a CEO to am I on Zoom? I'm generally trying to be a thoughtful leader, not make passive decisions.
Yeah. Not be an accidental leader.
Yeah.
Well, how did this play out when it came to your return to office strategy? How did you have an intentional conversation about that? Because we just heard Amazon say, hey, everyone's got to be back in the office 5 days a week. And some other organizations are not developing a policy. They're just still figuring it out, or they're letting the staff do whatever the heck they want. So I imagine that you have something very different at the Endocrine Society.
I'm not entirely sure that the end result is radically different. I would say that the way we got there is, and because of our intentionality, we actually have a lot better and faster acceptance by the staff.
Yes.
And so it was an easier process. I started in April of 21, but my predecessor left at the beginning of March in 2020.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's right. The team had been through a really rough year, as we all did in 2020, but added to not having a permanent CEO in place, there was a staff member who served as interim. So there was a lot of turmoil. And that is, of course, also a time of great uncertainty,
right,
for all of us on social justice issues and the pandemic, both happening right then.
Right.
And so the way we approached this decision was to start at the end. What it meant was we said, what kind of business do we need to run in order to achieve our mission? Okay, if that's the kind of business, once we decided, okay, we need to be, in our case, we needed to be one that was focused on collaboration and innovation. What were those systems and structures that needed to be in place to support having a collaborative and innovative culture? And so then when you think about the return to the office in that lens, hey, we're trying to achieve this, we're trying to do it in this way, the answers about how were we coming together and why were we coming together were self-evident. We are coming together because we believe that there is power in face-to-face collaboration and innovation, but it doesn't have to be all of the work. And so we've structured our work week in a way that meant that we had 2 days together, everybody in the office together, not half in the office on Zoom with the other half who are at home.
Yeah.
So that we are truly collaborating. And then the work itself is structured so that those 2 days are focused on work that is collaborative. There were 4 C's. I don't remember them all. We were collaborating, celebrating, creating, and there was a 4th C. That was the only kinds of work that should be done in the office those 4 days. And if it's a one-on-one meeting, that is on Zoom one of the other days of the week.
Boy, that makes a lot of sense. So you're saying if we're going to be in the office, then let's make it be, because we actually need to be in the office, collaborating and being together, as opposed to we're just here, but we're still having Zoom meetings.
Right. Because we all hate checking the box at work, right? And
yes,
there has to be rationale. As it was true for everybody, coming back into the office was uneven across staff in terms of their willingness and interest in it. But, pretty quick. And I'm convinced because of the thoughtfulness and because we shared all of this thinking with the staff.
Right.
We got through that period of transition and into sort of normal operations pretty quick.
Wow. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Kate, it's 2024. We're entering the last quarter. We're post-pandemic. You're a large organization that's achieved a lot of success. You have large reserves. How do you navigate the future to stay relevant, to continue to be successful?
I'd say that for us, it's about being really clear-eyed about where we are today, what's working, what's not, what we're good at, what we're not, what is working in our business, what's making us money, what's at risk, and then really trying to focus on those things that are really going to move the needle. There are a number of challenges in the association world, and there's sort of 2 that come to play for me here. The first is, I think, as association professionals as a whole, we tend to have rose-colored glasses on about things in our space. Either our understanding of something, aren't we all experts in meeting planning and membership? And all of our members are experts in all of these things too. And we're not as good at saying, oh, this program, while Dr. So-and-so launched it 5 years ago, it's no longer serving the purpose, right? Like all of these things, because we aren't really looking at things in a very real way. So I think it's really important to come to consensus on where we are right now and then have some willingness to take risk. I think we can fall on the side of the line that is more risk averse than we should as a society. And some calculated risk is okay. Quite frankly, some failure is okay. And that's part of what I meant by looking reality. I think we're all afraid of that word failure, particularly in front of members and boards. I really think there are different ways to approach these questions. For me, particularly because I happen to work in a field that has science at its core. And so for me, at least, being able to frame any risk, any action as the opportunity to learn automatically makes it successful, irrespective of the outcome. Because I've learned something either way.
Well, you're doing something really interesting. The Endocrine Society actually has an investment fund, which I find really fascinating. So tell us about that. What is it and how did it come about?
It came about through a number of things, but someday if we talk about onboarding as a new CEO, I'll mention that this all started during my interview for the job, not after I was on board. So the seeds for this concept were planted then. But one of the biggest reasons I took this job is because of this profile, which was that it was an organization that had largely plateaued financially. And we all know if you're not growing, you're dying. And it wasn't growing. It is sitting on $70 million in reserves.
Wow.
And to me, that sounds like a lot of fun. Figuring out and working with the member leaders to figure out how to use the reserves, not as a trophy, right? We've all learned that what is it? It was a year and a half worth of operating in reserves. Then it was a year in reserves, 6 months in reserves.
Right.
Whatever the number is, we've all been through the world's biggest rainy day, and most of us didn't touch a ton of our reserves. And so really, do we need that much sitting there doing nothing? So for me, it was about leveraging that trophy in a way that was really meaningful. Because of the field that I work in, and almost all of my career has been with science societies, the ability of our members in academia or medicine to pay for things. Right now, a big chunk of our revenues come from those sources, from conferences, journal articles, membership, etc. It is our view that in the future, we have to be successful. We have to find a way to decouple our financial success from our members' ability to pay. And for us, that means finding new ways to bring in revenues, not from necessarily new sources, not trying to expand our membership as we talked at the beginning, but rather truly different. So you mentioned the Innovation Fund. What this really is that the board has authorized us to use a significant portion of our reserves to try some higher risk, higher return investments.
Wow.
The way that this plays out is we have announced a deal that we did in partnership with a for-profit company. And we don't have anything to do with it. We just gave money and then we'll get some returns down the road, right? But we're not running this business. It's a pure investment. And we have a whole program and a business development strategy for identifying more of these opportunities. And we are largely trying to stay out of the endocrine space to date.
I was just going to ask. Okay.
Yeah, it's usually the question. And for us, that had to do with taking one of the stickiest wickets out of the game, which was, what if we're in competition with our sponsors or members?
Oh.
And so for us, if we took that off the playing field and we said, we're just looking for things that can make us money, more money that we could make leaving it in the stocks.
In the market, right?
Yeah, in the market, then we would move forward. And so we have a process for that. And we've probably evaluated, 25 different investment opportunities and are moving forward with a number of them. And we're looking at different ways. Is there opportunities? Some societies have partnered with venture capital firms. And so we're exploring that as well. But we're leaving open a lot of these higher risk ways of approaching our financial challenges to position us well for the future.
So, Kate, the investments that you're making, are they in the association space? And who's evaluating these business plans, if you will, to see if they'll be a good risk for the society?
It is not exclusively in the association vertical that we are looking, although just given who we are as professionals, that is where our network is. And so it is a big part of the portfolio. In terms of how are we going about it and how is it being evaluated, we're using a number of different approaches. So we have someone whose job it is to sort of be on point, on lead on all of this, shepherding it through. But then we have external groups who are partnering with us for various parts of this, either sourcing potential deals. We also are outsourcing all of the due diligence. And this is when we need market valuations done, that kind of thing, that are just so far past anything that we've done. We get that outside help.
Yeah.
And so we've sort of constructed a matrix of folks who are helping support this effort. And then we have governance systems to move it up through to get final board approval. But systems that are very nimble and much faster than most association committees have to work, because you need 5-day turns on some of these deals.
Well, speaking of governance, you've got a large association, big budget, large reserves, innovation fund. You got to be a bit of a governance geek and someone very skilled at governance to manage not just the organization, but to manage all the people and the decision makers and the board. How are you doing that? What's like a secret that you want to impart to people?
Find somebody who does it well and become a student.
Yeah?
That's the secret. When I am asked what advice would I give to somebody in the middle of their career, whatever, this is the answer to that. Figure out how to do member leader or volunteer member engagement and management. I mentioned earlier that my mentor, I spent a lot of time asking him very specific questions. This is one of those. It wasn't just why did you make this staff decision, but also how did you convince governance to let you? Why did you tell them this? Why didn't you tell them that?
Right.
How did you think about this agenda? Why did you think about it this way? So I was just constantly asking these questions. And I am very grateful that I had that skill set before I started this job. There's a lot of things I've had to learn on this job.
Yeah.
And probably a lot more to come. I'm very grateful I didn't have to learn this one. So it is both the intentionality, thinking about what do you want, but also thinking about this question of motivation. What motivates the folks at that table to be there? An example that I'll use here is the very first board meeting that happens after a CEO is hired, right? So I get hired and it's some number of months later that I have my first in-person board meeting. And I would attribute some of my success to the impression I made at that first meeting. Because it set me off on the right foot. And that was recognizing what the board members wanted out of that meeting. And it was interesting to step back and really give that some thought, because I'm not sure if you had just asked me, I would have immediately come up with what it was. Because what they want out of that meeting is to know they were right. They want to know that they didn't screw up by hiring you, by offering you the job. They weren't going to be embarrassed by you in their role as CEO. And so I had to find a way to help them see in me what they individually were looking for out of that CEO role, which took some time to sort of triangulate, right? This intentionality of trying to understand, why did Joanna, who's on my board, want to hire Kate Fryer? And then how do I make my presentation speak to that, along with the other 15 people in the room?
Wow. Because if they, at that first board meeting, say, phew, Kate's amazing, we made the right choice, then you have their confidence and you can actually do your job, as opposed to them maybe starting to second guess their decision and then they're kind of nitpicking at you.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Because then the relationship starts out on the foot it has to stay on, which is not nitpicking and down, but really is at a place of mutual trust.
Give us 3 tips for really killing that first board meeting.
Keep it short, speak to their motivations, and praise the heck out of the decisions that they made prior to you getting there.
That's really clever.
It's really easy to come in and talk about everything that's not working, but that has the potential to backfire. So I've spent a lot of time talking about what was working well and making sure that they owned those decisions, and that worked.
Right, because then they see you as a partner, because you're not questioning decisions that they made previously. You're someone who studied them, you agree with them, and now you're going to work together to navigate the future.
That's exactly right.
That is amazing advice. Kate, this has been an eye-opening and educational interview. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I hope that you will come back in the future, because I want to know about what other things you're doing, how the investments are panning out, and how you're blowing up everything at the Endocrine Society.
Thank you. I would be happy to. I appreciate you asking me to be here. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Associations Thrive. We're so glad to have you here. You know, my personal mission and the mission of my company, Matrix Group International, is to help associations and nonprofits increase membership, generate revenue, and thrive in the digital space. I want to hear stories of how your organization is thriving in today's challenging landscape. Please apply to be on my show by going to podcast.matrixgroup.net. By the way, do you need help with a digital initiative? Maybe it's a website redesign, a new membership database, or a hybrid meeting that you're planning. I'd love to connect with you. Please visit the Matrix Group website at matrixgroup.net. Thanks again for listening to this week's episode of Associations Thrive. Don't forget to subscribe to the show, leave a 5-star rating, post a comment, and share it with your colleagues and friends. Bye!